A Senate hearing room, cameras rolling. What's supposed to be a routine budget discussion is about to become something else entirely. Senator Jeff Merkley sits across from FBI Director Kash Patel. The topic? Funding requests. Standard Washington procedure. But then Merkley does something unexpected. He stops talking about money and starts talking about the Constitution. Specifically, the Fifth Amendment. The one that says, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. He asks the FBI director a simple question. Do you understand what that means? And Patel's answer shocks the room. What you're about to witness isn't just political theater. It's a constitutional crisis playing out in real time. A moment when the head of America's premier law enforcement agency reveals he either doesn't understand or doesn't care about the fundamental rights he swore to protect. This isn't about left versus right. This is about whether the people enforcing our laws actually know what those laws are. Stay with me. Because what happened in this hearing should alarm every American, regardless of politics.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much, Director Patel. And so, as I understood it, you testified yesterday that you'd like to have another $1 billion added on to the FY25 level to do the additional work you'd like to do on drug interdiction, fentanyl in general, and anti-terrorism. And today you gave us a budget that requests cutting $500 million. Which is it? Do you want us to, what are you asking of this committee? To add funds, add $1 billion, or to cut $500 million?
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate the opportunity. What I'm asking for is that with more, I can simply do more. And I was giving examples of what more I could do. I can do the mission, and am in support of the budget here, and I'm working with appropriators and you to fill the gaps.
So you support the budget presented that cuts $500 million, but you also support us adding $1 billion should we choose to do that?
Well, I can't not support the budget as proposed, because then I would be supporting no budget.
Okay. Well, we've got those two options. We do look forward to further details from you about how you plan to modify the function of FBI on these different missions that you've highlighted today, so that we can give it the appropriate consideration. Mm-hmm. Director Patel, you're familiar with the Fifth Amendment.
Yes, Senator.
And it is really the freedom clause of the United States. It was 4 years into being a nation when Congress and the states said, hey, we have to make sure that there's not an over-aggressive government in the future that deprives us of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And you're familiar that that applies to all persons in the United States.
Yes, Senator.
So there's been a lot of concern about the several hundred immigrants who were swept off the streets of America and sent to El Salvador without due process. And does that concern you?
Senator, I'm not in a position to comment on whether or not they were given or not given due process or are supposed to be afforded due process. All the FBI did and all the FBI will continue to do is arrest those that have violated the law.
Okay, but to arrest, you have to investigate. Have you launched an investigation of this violation of the Freedom Clause of the U.S. Constitution?
Senator, I don't know that I agree with your characterization.
Well, that was my first question, whether or not you agree with the Fifth Amendment and are prepared to defend it. It is your job to investigate crimes.
Yes, I agree with the Fifth Amendment. I agree with the entire Constitution, and the men and women at the FBI decide.
So are you going to launch an investigation of the reported violation of the due process of several hundred individuals?
Again, Senator, it's not for me to call the balls and strikes on it. The men and women at the FBI who are trained to open investigations will make those calls.
So you have no influence over whether an investigation is opened?
I have influence over it, but you're asking me a constitutional question. I'm not a constitutional scholar.
Well, it's actually not it's a question also of law.
But your position is that every one of those individuals is by constitutional right afforded due process. I don't know the answer to that. I'm telling you.
You haven't read the Constitution?
It
says all persons.
I've got it right here, but what you're saying is that every single one of the illegals that was sent down to El Salvador is supposed to be given due process pursuant.
Yeah, that's what the Constitution says. It says no person.
It doesn't say that.
It does say no person. Yeah, I'll encourage you to read it, because it's also been affirmed by the Supreme Court repeatedly. In the case of Miranda versus Arizona, held the right of all individuals, regardless of citizenship status, the Supreme Court in Reno versus Flores. I mean, but it's the plain language of the Constitution. It concerns me that you're not familiar with the core concept of due process applying to all persons as written in black and white in the Constitution.
As the first public defender who's ever served at the FBI as its director, I am more aware of due process than any predecessor in my seat. You are delineating between removal proceedings and criminal acts. My job is to investigate criminal acts. That's what we do.
You are aware that the Fifth Amendment refers to taking away liberty, and when people are arrested on the street, detained and sent out of the country, that their liberty has been taken away.
Senator, that is a constitutional question that you are asking me to answer. It's not for me to answer.
The question has already been answered by the Supreme Court that they're protected, therefore it's a violation of law, and it's your responsibility to open an investigation, and you're saying today you will not do so?
I am not the agency involved in removal proceedings. That is a different branch of government.
So if an agency other than the FBI violates the law and the Constitution, you will not investigate because it's a different agency?
I will investigate every violation of law.
Well, you have, but you just said you're not investigating.
No. You and I are in disagreement on what is a violation of law. I have yet to hear from the Supreme Court your position as you have adjudicated it.
Well, very, very interesting, because the Supreme Court's been very clear, and I had heard you were...
To understand how we got here, we need to start with the budget, because that's where Merkley springs his trap. Just weeks earlier, Patel had gone before Congress requesting additional funding, an extra $1 billion. His justification? Critical counterterrorism work in fighting the fentanyl crisis. Standard ask. Serious issues. The kind of request that usually gets bipartisan support. But then the official FBI budget gets released. And instead of the requested increase, there's a $500 million cut. That's not just a denial of his request. That's $1.5 billion swing in the opposite direction, Merkley notices. And he starts asking questions. Director Patel, you requested an additional $1 billion for counterterrorism and fentanyl operations. Critical work, you said. Life or death priorities. Now the budget cuts $500 million. How does that work exactly? Patel stumbles through an answer. Something about efficiency. Doing more with less. The usual bureaucratic doublespeak, but Merkley isn't buying it. Because this isn't really about the budget. It's about establishing a pattern of saying one thing and doing another. Of claiming certain work is critical while defunding it. Of talking tough while acting weak. And that pattern is about to become very important. Then Merkley shifts gears. Completely. From budget minutia to constitutional fundamentals. Director Patel, are you familiar with the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution? The question hangs in the air. It seems almost insulting. Of course the FBI director knows the Fifth Amendment. Right? Patel nods. Yes, of course, Merkley continues. Can you recite it for us? Now Patel looks uncomfortable. He glances at his notes, at his staff, at anywhere but Merkley. I'm not a constitutional scholar, Senator. That response. Right there. That's the moment everything changes. You're not a constitutional scholar. You're the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, an agency that exists specifically to enforce federal law. Federal law that derives its authority from the Constitution. The same Constitution you swore an oath to support and defend, and you're claiming you're not a scholar of it? Merkley doesn't say all that, not yet, but it's written all over his face. And everyone watching knows what just happened. The FBI director just admitted he's not familiar with the foundational legal document that gives his job meaning. Merkley decides to help. He pulls out a copy of the Constitution, opens it to the Bill of Rights, and reads aloud. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime, unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. He pauses. Let me repeat that last part. No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Director Patel, do you understand what that means? It's a simple question. The kind you'd ask a law student. The kind that should have a simple answer from the head of the FBI. Patel shifts in his seat. Well, Senator, there are various interpretations. No, there really aren't. Not about the core principle. Due process means you get a hearing before the government takes your freedom. You get to know the charges. You get to present a defense. You get your day in court. That's not interpretation. That's the bedrock of American justice. The thing that separates us from authoritarian regimes. The principle we've fought wars to defend. And the FBI director is treating it like it's optional. Now Merkley gets to why he's asking. Because this isn't theoretical. Director Patel, I've received reports that hundreds of immigrants have been deported to El Salvador without hearings, without due process, in direct violation of the Fifth Amendment. These aren't criminals evading justice. These are people pulled from their homes, taken into custody and put on planes without ever seeing a judge, without ever being able to present their case, without any of the protections the Constitution guarantees to every person, not just citizens. Every person. Dr. Merkley cites the numbers, the documentation, the testimony from immigration lawyers and advocacy groups. This isn't speculation. This is happening. And the FBI, supposedly the nation's premier law enforcement agency, has done nothing, said nothing, investigated nothing. Why? Patel's response is telling. He doesn't deny the reports. He doesn't claim they've been investigated. He doesn't express concern. Instead, he deflects. Senator, those are removal proceedings. That falls under the Department of Homeland Security. Not the FBI's jurisdiction, not my job. That's the defense. Constitutional violations are happening, and the FBI director's response is, not my department. Merkley isn't having it. He leans forward. Director Patel, the FBI's mission statement says, you protect and defend the United States against terrorist and foreign intelligence threats. You uphold and enforce the criminal laws of the United States. You provide leadership in criminal justice services, uphold and enforce the criminal laws. Those laws derive from the Constitution. When the government violates the Constitution, that's not a jurisdictional technicality. That's a federal crime. It's called deprivation of rights under color of law. 18 U.S. Code Section 242. It's literally a federal statute the FBI is supposed to enforce. So when you say it's not your jurisdiction, what you're really saying is, I don't want to investigate violations that might be politically inconvenient. Patel bristles. Senator, I resent that characterization, then investigate. Prove me wrong. Show me the FBI is taking these constitutional violations seriously. Silence. Patel has no response. Because they both know the truth. The FBI isn't investigating. Because someone higher up decided that immigration enforcement gets a pass on constitutional requirements, and Patel is going along with it. Merkley decides to remove any ambiguity. He starts citing case law. Director Patel, you claim you're not a constitutional scholar. Fine, let me educate you. Miranda versus Arizona. 1966. The Supreme Court held that constitutional protections apply during custodial interrogation. You know why? Because the Fifth Amendment isn't optional. Reno versus Flores, 1997. The court held that immigrant children are entitled to due process protections. You know what that established? That immigration status doesn't erase constitutional rights. Zadvidas versus Davis, 2001. The court held that indefinite detention without judicial review violates due process. Again, applying to non-citizens. These aren't obscure rulings. These are landmark cases, the kind covered in every constitutional law course, the kind that fundamentally shape how law enforcement operates. And the FBI director is sitting there acting like this is news to him. Merkley pulls out the Constitution again. Director Patel, you mentioned you have a copy right there. I suggest you read it. Not the executive summary, not the talking points, the actual text. The room is silent. Staff members look uncomfortable. Patel's face is red, because everyone can see what's happening. A United States senator is giving the FBI director a civics lesson. On live television, Patel tries to recover. He reaches for a small booklet on the table, holds it up. Senator, I have the Constitution right here. I carry it with me. It's meant to be a moment of vindication. See, I do respect the Constitution, but Merkley doesn't let it land. Then read it. Read the Fifth Amendment, out loud. Right now, Patel freezes. The booklet is in his hand. The cameras are on him. Merkley has just called his bluff, and Patel can't do it. He stammers. Well, Senator, I don't think this is the appropriate forum for what? For the FBI director to demonstrate basic knowledge of the document he swore to defend? For the nation's top law enforcement official to show he understands the rights he's supposed to protect? This is exactly the appropriate forum. This is a Senate hearing. This is oversight. This is democracy functioning as intended, and Patel is failing spectacularly. He finally mutters something about reviewing the relevant statutes and getting back to the committee. Classic bureaucratic retreat. The answer you give when you have no answer. Merkley lets the silence hang. He doesn't need to say more. The point is made, but Merkley isn't done, because there's a deeper issue here, one that goes beyond Patel's discomfort. Director Patel, the Fifth Amendment, says no person, not no citizen, not no American. Person. That word choice wasn't accidental. The framers knew what they were doing. They could have limited rights to citizens. Many provisions of the Constitution do exactly that. Voting rights, the right to run for office. Those are explicitly limited to citizens, but the Bill of Rights, those protections apply to persons. Anyone subject to U.S. government authority, citizen or not. You know why? Because rights aren't granted by government. They're inherent. They exist because you're human, not because you have the right paperwork. That's the foundation of American justice. That's what makes us different from authoritarian regimes that grant rights selectively based on status or loyalty. And right now, our government is violating that principle, deporting people without hearings, without due process. In direct contradiction to the Constitution, Patel tries to interrupt. Senator, I understand your concerns, but no buts. Either the Constitution means what it says, or it doesn't. Either we apply it consistently, or we don't. There's no middle ground here. And if the FBI won't investigate constitutional violations because they're politically inconvenient, then what's the FBI for? This is where the hearing transcends politics. Because Merkley is no longer just questioning Patel's competence. He's questioning his morality. Director Patel, do you personally believe that immigrants are entitled to due process? It's a simple yes or no question. But Patel can't answer it simply. Senator, I believe we need to enforce our immigration laws. That's not what I asked. I asked if you believe immigrants are entitled to constitutional protections. We have a serious border crisis that requires Director Patel, yes or no. Do immigrants have Fifth Amendment rights? The pause is excruciating because everyone knows why Patel won't answer. Because saying yes would require him to acknowledge what's happening is wrong. And saying no would reveal that he doesn't actually believe in equal justice under law. So he says nothing. Or rather, he says everything without saying anything. Senator, these are complex policy questions that involve multiple agencies. Translation. I'm not going to commit to upholding constitutional rights if it might conflict with the administration's priorities. That's the answer. That's the moral failing at the heart of this hearing. The FBI director doesn't believe rights apply equally. He believes they're negotiable based on politics. Merkley shifts tactics. He talks about the oath of office. Director Patel, when you became FBI director, you swore an oath. Do you remember the words? I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Not some of the Constitution. Not the parts that are politically convenient. The Constitution, all of it, including the Fifth Amendment. When you took that oath, you didn't swear to enforce immigration policy. You didn't swear to advance the administration's agenda. You swore to defend the Constitution. That means when the government violates constitutional rights, your job is to investigate, to hold people accountable, to ensure justice is served. Not to say, not my jurisdiction, not to defer to other agencies. To do your job, Patel looks miserable. Because Merkley is right, and everyone knows it. The oath isn't symbolic. It's a binding commitment. And Patel is breaking it in front of Congress, on camera, for all Americans to see. Senator, I take my oath very seriously, then act like it. Investigate these deportations. Interview the people affected. Examine whether due process was followed. And if it wasn't, recommend prosecutions. Do the job you swore to do. But Patel has one more defense, the bureaucratic shield. The idea that as long as someone else made the decision, he's not responsible. Senator, these removal proceedings were conducted by ICE, under DHS authority. The FBI doesn't oversee immigration enforcement, and there it is. The eternal Washington excuse, someone else's responsibility, not my department. Stay in your lane. Merkley demolishes it. Director Patel, when a local police department violates someone's civil rights, does the FBI investigate? Yes, under certain circumstances. When a prison systematically abuses inmates, does the FBI investigate? If civil rights violations are alleged, yes. When a government official deprives someone of constitutional rights, does the FBI investigate? That depends on, no, it doesn't depend. It's literally your mandate. 18 U.S. Code Section 242. Deprivation of rights under color of law. Federal crime. FBI jurisdiction. So when ICE deports hundreds of people without due process hearings, violating their Fifth Amendment rights, that's a federal crime. One you're supposed to investigate. The fact that it's ICE doing it doesn't make it legal. Wearing a badge doesn't give you permission to violate the Constitution. Patel has no response. Because the logic is airtight, and he knows it. Merkley drives the point home with more case law, because this isn't theoretical. The Supreme Court has been crystal clear. Director Patel, I mentioned Reno versus Flores earlier. Let me give you the exact language from that decision. He pulls out a printout. Reads from it. The Fifth Amendment's Due Process Clause protects all persons within the United States, including aliens, whether their presence is lawful, unlawful, temporary, or permanent. All persons, including aliens, whether lawful or unlawful. The Supreme Court could not have been clearer. Immigration status does not strip you of constitutional rights, Merkley continues. Here's another one. Sedvitas versus Davis. Freedom from imprisonment, from government custody, detention, or other forms of physical restraint lies at the heart of the liberty that clause protects. And here's the key part. The Due Process Clause applies to all persons within the United States, including aliens, whether their presence here is lawful, unlawful, temporary, or permanent. Director Patel, these aren't liberal activist judges. This is the Supreme Court, the final authority on constitutional interpretation. And they've told you, repeatedly, the due process applies to everyone. So when you sit here and claim these deportations aren't your problem, you're not just ducking responsibility. You're ignoring the Supreme Court. You're defying the Constitution you swore to defend. Is that really the position you want to take? By this point, Patel's discomfort is palpable. He's shifting in his chair, avoiding eye contact. His staff is frantically passing him notes. This wasn't supposed to happen. This was supposed to be a budget hearing. A few softball questions. Maybe some theater for the cameras. Then everyone goes home. Instead, Patel is being systematically dismantled. On constitutional grounds, with Supreme Court precedent, on live television, and there's no escape. Because Merkley isn't making political arguments. He's citing the law, the actual written, judicially interpreted law. You can't spin your way out of the Fifth Amendment. You can't claim executive privilege over the Supreme Court. You can't dismiss the Constitution as a difference of opinion. Patel tries one more deflection. Senator, I appreciate your concerns. I will take them under advisement and consult with our legal team. Under advisement. Consult with the legal team. These are the phrases bureaucrats use when they plan to do absolutely nothing but want to sound responsive. Merkley knows it. Everyone watching knows it, but Merkley isn't going to let him off that easy. Because there's one more question, the one that matters most. Director Patel, Merkley's voice is calm, but there's steel underneath. Will you commit here and now to ensuring that every action taken by the FBI respects due process? That no one, regardless of citizenship status, will be deprived of their constitutional rights by your agents? It's the simplest question in the world. The one every law enforcement official should be able to answer instantly, without hesitation. Without qualification? Yes. Yes, I will uphold the Constitution. Yes, I will protect everyone's rights. Yes, that's literally my job. That's the answer. That's the only answer. But Patel can't say it. Won't say it. Instead, he mutters, sure. Sure, that's not a commitment. That's what you say when someone asks if you want fries with your burger. That's dismissive. That's contemptuous. That's an FBI director who either doesn't understand or doesn't care about the oath he took. Merkley stares at him. The silence stretches. Other senators are watching. Staff members have stopped typing. Everyone can feel the weight of this moment, because this isn't just about one hearing. It's about whether our institutions still function, whether the people in charge still believe in the principles this country was founded on, and Patel just revealed that he doesn't. What makes this moment so significant is that Patel isn't an outlier. He's representative. Across the government, we're seeing officials who treat constitutional rights as suggestions rather than requirements, who believe a due process is something you extend when it's politically convenient and ignore when it's not. Look at the pattern. Immigration enforcement that skips hearings, surveillance programs that violate the Fourth Amendment, detention practices that ignore habeas corpus, all justified by some version of national security or border crisis or public safety. But here's what the framers understood. The Constitution isn't for easy times. It's for hard times. It's specifically designed to protect rights when there's pressure to violate them. If you only respect due process when it's convenient, you don't actually believe in due process. You believe in power, and you're dressing it up in legal language to make it sound legitimate. That's authoritarianism. It just moves slowly, bureaucratically, with proper forms, filed in triplicate, but the result is the same. A government that operates above the law, that decides who gets rights and who doesn't, that treats the Constitution as optional. And when the FBI director embodies that attitude, we're in serious trouble. Because the FBI is supposed to be the check, the agency that investigates violations, that holds power accountable. If the FBI won't do it, who will? Us. This is how democracies die. Not with tanks and coups. With bureaucrats saying, not my job. With officials who value political loyalty over constitutional duty. With institutions that prioritize power over principle. It starts small. A few deportations without hearings. Some surveillance without warrants. Detention without charges. Each individual case might seem minor. An exception. An emergency that required shortcuts. But exceptions become precedents. Shortcuts become standard procedure. And before you know it, the Constitution is something we talk about in speeches, but ignore in practice. That's the warning Merkley is sounding. This isn't just about immigration. It's about the rule of law itself. When we allow constitutional violations, because we don't like the people being violated, we establish that rights are conditional. That some people deserve protection and others don't. And once you establish that principle, there's no limiting it. Today, it's undocumented immigrants. Tomorrow, it's political protesters. Next week, it's journalists who ask inconvenient questions. Because power, once unaccountable, always expands. It never voluntarily restrains itself. The only check is us. Citizens who demand accountability, who insist that principles matter, who refuse to accept not my job as an answer from officials who swore an oath. That's what Merkley is doing in this hearing. Not just questioning Patel, modeling what accountability looks like. Let's be clear about what this hearing revealed. First, the FBI director doesn't have a functional understanding of the Constitution he swore to defend. That's not partisan criticism. That's observable fact. He couldn't recite the Fifth Amendment. He couldn't explain its application. He treated it like an obscure legal technicality rather than a foundational principle. Second, he has no interest in investigating constitutional violations when they're politically inconvenient. He hid behind jurisdictional excuses that don't withstand basic scrutiny. Third, and most damning, he doesn't believe constitutional rights apply equally. His refusal to commit to due process for everyone speaks volumes. Not about his politics, about his character. This is the person leading the FBI, the agency responsible for protecting civil rights, for investigating government misconduct, for ensuring justice is served, and he can't even commit to upholding the Constitution. That should terrify every American, regardless of where you stand on immigration, regardless of your political affiliation. Because if the FBI won't protect rights, who will? If the director doesn't understand the Constitution, who does? If accountability is optional, what's the point of oversight? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're urgent ones. And this hearing showed we don't have good answers. So what do? First, we pay attention. Hearings like this reveal who our leaders really are. Not the carefully scripted public persona, the real person when pressed with hard questions. Watch them. Listen to them. Judge them by their actions, not their promises. Second, we demand better. From every official, at every level. When they swear an oath to the Constitution, hold them to it. Don't accept jurisdictional excuses. Don't accept not my job. Third, we support the Jeff Merkleys. The lawmakers who actually do oversight, who ask hard questions, who refuse to accept bureaucratic deflection. They're outnumbered. They're fighting uphill. But they're doing the work that keeps democracy functional. Fourth, we educate ourselves. Learn the Constitution. Understand your rights. Know the Supreme Court precedents that define them. Because an informed citizenry is the only real check on government power. When we don't know our rights, we can't defend them. And fifth, we vote. In every election. For officials who will prioritize constitutional duty over political expediency. Who understand that rights aren't negotiable. Who will actually do their jobs. Democracy isn't autopilot. It requires constant maintenance, constant vigilance, constant effort. This hearing showed what happens when we slack off. When we assume institutions will protect themselves. When we trust officials to do the right thing without oversight, they don't. They won't. Unless we make them. Senator Jeff Merkley walked into a budget hearing and delivered a constitutional lesson. Not because he wanted to embarrass Patel, but because someone had to speak up. Someone had to say, this isn't okay. This isn't normal. This matters. FBI Director Kash Patel revealed who he is. Not through some gotcha moment. Through his own words, his own evasions, his own refusal to commit to constitutional principles. Now we know. The question is, what will we do with that knowledge? Will we accept that this is how things are? That officials can ignore the Constitution without consequences? That not my job is an acceptable answer? Or will we demand accountability? Will we insist that oaths mean something? Will we hold power to the same standards we hold everyone else? The choice is ours, but we have to make it. Because silence is complicity. Looking away is acceptance. Assuming someone else will fix it is how we got here. Thank you for watching. If this video opened your eyes, share it. Because what happened in this hearing needs to be seen widely, discussed seriously, remembered when it matters. The Constitution isn't just a document. It's a promise. And right now, people in power are breaking that promise. It's up to us to hold them accountable. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and above all, stay committed to the principles that make democracy possible.